The sound of horseshoes on hard-packed earth echoed through the sleeping town of Redemption Creek as Forrest Wade pulled his weary stallion to a halt outside the only blacksmith shop for 20 miles, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Colorado Territory, 1875. Forrest squinted up at the darkening sky, feeling the first drops of rain begin to fall on his weather-beaten face. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, his horse's right front shoe loosening with every mile. The small mining settlement of Redemption Creek was his last hope before the punishing mountain pass that would take him to his homestead. "Damn it all," he muttered, noting the darkened windows of the smithy. No smoke rose from the forge chimney. The place looked abandoned. Lightning split the sky, followed by a deep rumble of thunder that sent his horse sidling nervously. Forrest patted the animal's neck. "Easy there, Thunder. We'll find shelter at least. The stable behind the smithy would have to do." He dismounted stiffly, his tall frame aching from the long ride. At 32, Forrest Wade was still in his prime, but 5 years of ranching alone had begun to wear on him. His broad shoulders carried not just the weight of his pack but the burden of solitude. He led Thunder around back, pushing open the stable door as another flash of lightning illuminated the interior. The sudden brightness revealed something Forrest hadn't expected: a slender figure huddled in the corner of an empty stall, clutching a small bundle protectively to her chest. Forrest froze. The woman's eyes flew open, wide with fear. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stable wall. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse but determined. The bundle in her arms squirmed, and Forrest realized it was a baby, perhaps no more than a few months old. "Madam, I mean no harm," Forrest said softly, removing his hat. Rain dripped from the brim, forming a small puddle at his feet. "Just looking for shelter from the storm. And maybe some horseshoes, if there's a smith around." The woman didn't relax her protective stance. "There's no smith. Not anymore." Forrest noticed now the dark circles under her eyes, the way her dress hung too loosely on her frame. Her hair, a rich auburn color, was pulled back in a simple knot, but tendrils had escaped to frame a face that might have been pretty if not for the exhaustion etched into every line. "I'm Forrest Wade," he offered. "Rancher from up near Silver Creek." The woman hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Olivia James," she replied. "And this is Penny." The baby fussed slightly, and Olivia rocked her gently. "You're staying here?" Forrest asked, glancing around at the hay-strewn floor. "Just for tonight," Olivia said quickly. "We'll be moving on tomorrow." Thunder nickered softly behind Forrest, drawing Olivia's attention. "Beautiful horse," she commented, her voice softer now. "Thank you. He needs a new shoe, though." Forrest paused. "You said there's no smith. What happened?" "My husband was the blacksmith," Olivia said, her chin lifting slightly. "He died 3 months ago. Fever took him quick." The baby began to cry in earnest now, a thin wail that echoed in the empty stable. "She's hungry," Olivia explained, looking embarrassed. "I haven't. I need to feed her." "Of course," Forrest said, backing toward the door. "I'll see to my horse. Take your time." He led Thunder to the other end of the stable, removing his saddle and rubbing the animal down with a handful of straw. All the while, he couldn't help but wonder what Olivia James and her baby were doing sleeping in an abandoned stable. A widow with a small child should have family, friends, someone to take her in. Once Thunder was settled with some feed Forrest found in a barrel, he cleared his throat to announce his presence before returning to where Olivia sat. "Storm's getting worse," he observed. "Looks like we're both staying put for the night." Olivia nodded, adjusting her dress as she finished feeding the baby. "There's plenty of room. You know how to shoe a horse?" Forrest asked, settling down on a bale of hay across from her. A sad smile touched Olivia's lips. I watched my husband enough times. I could probably manage, but I haven't the strength to work the forge now. Where are you headed? Forrest asked. Denver, she replied. My cousin's there. Wrote that she could find me work as a seamstress. That's a long way on foot with a baby. Olivia's eyes flashed. We're managing. No offense intended, madam. It's just that Denver's nearly 100 miles from here. The baby had fallen asleep, her tiny face peaceful against her mother's shoulder. Forrest noticed how Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she stroked the infant's back. When did you last eat? He asked suddenly. Olivia looked away. We're fine. Forrest stood and went to his saddlebags, returning with some jerky, hardtack, and a tin of peaches he'd been saving. It's not much, he said, laying the food between them. Olivia stared at the offering, pride warring with hunger on her face. Finally, she reached for the tin. Thank you, she whispered. They ate in silence, the rain drumming on the roof above them. When Olivia had finished, some color had returned to her cheeks. How old is your daughter? Forrest asked. 5 months, Olivia answered, her expression softening as she looked at the sleeping child. She was born just before Thomas, my husband, took ill. She's beautiful, Forrest said, and meant it. The baby had a dusting of auburn hair like her mother's and plump, rosy cheeks despite their circumstances. She's all I have left, Olivia said simply. As the night deepened, Forrest built a small fire in an old brazier he found in the corner of the stable. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and for a while, they shared the comfortable silence of strangers thrown together by circumstance. You should sleep, Forrest eventually said. I'll keep watch. Olivia looked hesitant. Why would you do that? Because it's the right thing to do, he replied. And because I reckon you haven't had a proper night's rest in some time. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you, Mr. Wade. Forrest, he corrected. Just Forrest. Olivia settled back into the hay, cradling Penny against her. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Forrest watched the fire, occasionally adding a small piece of wood to keep it going. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the stable, a strange peace had settled over him. It had been years since he'd shared space with another soul besides his livestock. Years since he'd felt the simple human connection of breaking bread with someone. As he watched Olivia and her child sleeping in the firelight, something stirred in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name, but one that made the stable seem less like a temporary shelter and more like a place he was meant to be. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the night. Forrest had dozed off in the early hours, and he woke to find Olivia already up, attempting to build up the fire with one hand while holding Penny in the other. Here, let me, he offered, getting to his feet. I didn't want to wake you, Olivia said. You looked peaceful. Forrest took over the fire building, aware of Olivia watching him. In the light of day, he could see her more clearly. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or so. Her eyes were a deep green, set in a heart-shaped face that, despite the hardship she'd endured, retained a gentle beauty. How long have you been on the road? He asked. 2 weeks, she replied. We stayed as long as we could in town, but after Thomas died, the bank took the shop. Said we owed on loans I never knew about. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Forrest heard the underlying hurt. That's not right, he said, frowning. Olivia shrugged. Right doesn't matter much when you're a woman alone. After a simple breakfast of the remaining food from Forrest's pack, he found himself reluctant to say goodbye. Olivia was preparing to leave, gathering the few belongings she had into a worn carpet bag. I've been thinking, Forrest said suddenly, about your husband's forge. Olivia paused, looking at him questioningly. You said you know something about shoeing horses. And I need a new shoe for Thunder. I told you I haven't the strength. But I do. Forrest interrupted. You could tell me what to do. And if the forge is still operational, maybe we could get that shoe fixed before we go our separate ways. Olivia considered this. The forge should still be there. The bank didn't take the tools, just the building. Then it's settled, Forrest said, more pleased than he cared to admit. We'll fix Thunder's shoe, and then, well, then we'll see. The blacksmith shop was dusty but otherwise intact. The bank had indeed left the tools, probably because they were too specialized to be of much value to anyone but a smith. Forrest set about lighting the forge while Olivia, with Penny secured in a sling across her chest, sorted through the tools they would need. Thomas always said the secret was in the heating, she explained, watching as Forrest pumped the bellows. Not too hot or you'll burn the metal. Forrest followed her instructions carefully, heating the metal, shaping it on the anvil, and finally fitting it to Thunder's hoof. It was hard, sweaty work, but there was satisfaction in it, especially with Olivia's quiet guidance. You're a natural, she said as he finished, a note of admiration in her voice. Forrest felt an absurd rush of pride at her words. Had a good teacher, he replied, wiping sweat from his brow. They stood together in the doorway of the shop, looking out at the town beginning to stir to life. Forrest knew he should be heading out, continuing his journey home, but the thought brought no joy. Where will you go now? Olivia asked as if reading his thoughts. Back to my ranch, he said. Got livestock to tend to. Olivia nodded, her eyes downcast. Thank you for your help, Forrest, for the food and for watching over us last night. It was nothing, he said, though it had been something. Something significant. Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. Denver's a hard place, Forrest finally said, especially for a woman alone with a child. I'll manage, Olivia replied, though without conviction. Forrest took a deep breath. My ranch. It's not much. Small house, about 50 head of cattle. But it's good land, with a stream running through it. He hesitated, then plunged ahead. It needs a woman's touch. Has for a long time. Olivia looked up at him, her eyes wide. What I'm trying to say, Forrest continued, his voice rough with emotion, is that I could use help, and you need a place. Maybe we could help each other. You're offering me a job? Olivia asked carefully. I'm offering you a home, Forrest clarified. For you and Penny. No strings attached. You can have your own room in the house. Help with what you can. Stay until you get on your feet or longer if you find you like it there. Olivia looked down at Penny, who was contentedly chewing on her own fist. Why would you do this? You don't know me. I know enough, Forrest said simply. I know you're brave and resourceful. I know you love your daughter enough to sleep in a stable rather than give up. And I know that my house has been empty for too long. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. It's not charity? Call it a business arrangement if you like. I need someone to cook and keep house while I work the land. You need a roof over your head. Seems fair to me. Olivia wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come, Forrest urged, just to see the place. If you don't like it, I'll take you to Denver myself. For a long moment, Olivia was silent, her eyes searching his face. Then slowly she nodded. All right, we'll come and see this ranch of yours. The relief Forrest felt was overwhelming. He hadn't realized until that moment how desperately he'd wanted her to say yes. We should get supplies before we go, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. It's a 2-day ride to Silver Creek. 2 days on horseback? Olivia glanced at Penny. Thunder's strong enough to carry us all, Forrest assured her. And we'll take it slow. As they walked toward the general store, Forrest kept stealing glances at Olivia and her baby. He wasn't entirely sure what had possessed him to make such an offer. All he knew was that the thought of this woman and child struggling alone in Denver had been unbearable. For the first time in years, Forrest Wade felt the stirring of hope that his empty house might become a home again, and that the loneliness that had been his constant companion might finally be banished. The journey to Silver Creek took longer than the 2 days Forrest had predicted. With Olivia and Penny riding double with him, they had to stop frequently to rest and care for the baby. But Forrest found he didn't mind the slower pace. Each night, they camped under the stars, and he learned more about the woman he had invited into his life. Olivia had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a schoolteacher. She had met Thomas James when he came through town with a wagon train headed west. Against her parents' wishes, she had married him at 19 and followed him to Colorado Territory, where he had set up his blacksmith shop in the growing settlement of Redemption Creek. "We were happy," she told Forrest on their second night on the trail. Penny was asleep between them, the campfire casting a golden glow over her tiny features. "Thomas was a good man, worked hard. We had plans for a big family." "I'm sorry you lost him," Forrest said sincerely. Olivia nodded, gazing into the flames. "What about you? Have you always been a rancher?" Forrest poked at the fire with a stick. "No. Grew up in Tennessee. My father was a carpenter. Taught me the trade. But I always wanted land of my own." He paused, memories washing over him. "Came west after the war. Worked as a trail hand for a few years. Saved every penny. Bought my place 5 years ago." "You fought in the war?" Olivia asked. "Confederate side," Forrest admitted. "Not by choice. Tennessee was divided, but our county went with the South. I was 18 when they called us up." "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to," Olivia said gently. Forrest appreciated her understanding. The war was still a raw subject, even after all these years. "Maybe another time," he said. On the third day, they crested a ridge, and Forrest's ranch came into view below them. It wasn't much compared to some of the bigger spreads in the territory, a small log house with a barn and corral beside it, surrounded by rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. A creek wound through the property, lined with cottonwoods that were just beginning to turn gold with the approaching autumn. "There it is," Forrest said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Wade Ranch." Olivia took in the scene, her expression unreadable. "It's beautiful," she finally said. "Like I said, it's not much." "No," Olivia interrupted. "It really is beautiful. Peaceful." Relief flooded through Forrest. "Wait until you see the inside," he said, urging Thunder forward down the slope. As they approached the house, Forrest felt a sudden nervousness. He hadn't had visitors in so long, and certainly never a woman and child. What would Olivia think of his bachelor quarters? He needn't have worried. Olivia's practicality overrode any judgment she might have had about the sparse furnishings and dusty surfaces. "It needs a good cleaning," she said, bouncing Penny on her hip as she surveyed the main room with its stone fireplace and rough wooden table. "But the bones are good." "There are 2 bedrooms," Forrest explained, leading her down a short hallway. "Mine's at the end. This one's yours." He pushed open a door to reveal a small room with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "It's perfect," Olivia said softly. "Penny and I will be very comfortable here." Forrest felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "I'll get your things from Thunder and see to the horses. You and Penny make yourselves at home." By the time Forrest had tended to the animals and brought in firewood, Olivia had already begun transforming the house. She had found a broom and swept the main room, wiped down the table, and was heating water on the cook stove. "Hope you don't mind," she said when she saw him watching her from the doorway. "I can't sit idle." "Mind? I'm grateful," Forrest replied honestly. "Place hasn't looked this good since, well, ever." Olivia smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and made something twist pleasantly in Forrest's chest. "I thought I'd make supper with some of the supplies we bought. Are you hungry?" "Starving," Forrest admitted. That first meal in the house together, a simple affair of beans, bacon, and biscuits, felt significant somehow. As they ate by lamplight, with Penny sleeping in a makeshift cradle Forrest had quickly fashioned from a wooden crate, Forrest realized how desperately he had missed having someone to share his table with. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the property," he said as they finished eating. "Introduce you to the livestock." "I'd like that," Olivia replied. She hesitated, then added, "Forrest, I want you to know how much I appreciate what you're doing for us. I promise we won't be a burden." "You're not a burden," Forrest said firmly. "Having you here is good. For the place. For me." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that whatever this arrangement was, it mattered to them both. The days settled into a rhythm. Forrest worked the ranch, tending to his small herd of cattle, mending fences, and preparing for the coming winter. Olivia kept the house, cooking meals that were far better than anything Forrest had made for himself, washing clothes and caring for Penny. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Forrest found himself sharing stories he hadn't thought about in years, tales of his childhood in Tennessee, his dreams for the ranch, even, eventually, some of his experiences during the war. In turn, Olivia told him about her life in St. Louis, her love of books, her hopes for Penny's future. She spoke of Thomas too, honoring his memory while slowly coming to terms with his absence. As the weeks passed, Forrest noticed subtle changes in Olivia. The worry lines between her brows began to fade. She laughed more easily, and sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he would catch her gazing out at the land with a contentment that mirrored his own feelings about the place. Penny thrived in the mountain air. She was growing quickly, her personality emerging as she began to sit up on her own and babble in her own language. Forrest found himself enchanted by the baby's antics, often spending his evening hours on the floor with her, letting her grab at his fingers with her tiny hands. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the distant peaks, Forrest returned from checking on a pregnant heifer to find Olivia standing on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the chill. "Everything all right?" he asked, coming up beside her. Olivia nodded. "Just watching the sunset. I never get tired of it here." Forrest followed her gaze to where the sinking sun painted the mountains in shades of pink and gold. "Best view in Colorado territory," he agreed. "Penny's asleep," Olivia said after a moment. "She wore herself out trying to crawl today." Forrest smiled at the thought. "She'll be running circles around us before we know it." The us slipped out naturally, and neither of them remarked on it, though Forrest felt a warmth spread through him at the implication. "I got a letter from my cousin in Denver," Olivia said suddenly. "The postmaster brought it when he delivered those nails you ordered." Forrest's heart sank. Was this it? Was she going to say it was time for her and Penny to move on? "She wants to know when we're coming," Olivia continued, her voice carefully neutral. "Says the position at the dressmaker's shop is still open if I want it." Forrest gripped the porch railing, steadying himself. "I see," he managed. "And do you want it? I mean..." Olivia turned to face him fully. In the fading light, her eyes were luminous. "No," she said simply. "I don't." Relief flooded through Forrest so powerfully that for a moment he couldn't speak. "This place," Olivia went on, gesturing at the land spread out before them, "it feels like home now. For me and for Penny. I haven't felt this settled since before Thomas died. Maybe even before that. I'm glad, Forrest said, his voice rough with emotion. I want you to stay. Both of you. As your housekeeper? Olivia asked, and there was something in her tone that made Forrest's pulse quicken. As whatever you want to be, he said honestly. I just know that the thought of you leaving makes this place seem empty, even though it was my home for years before you came. Olivia took a step closer to him, close enough that he could smell the lavender she used to wash her hair. And what do you want me to be, Forrest Wade? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Forrest knew that his answer would change everything. I want you to be my partner, he said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him. In all things. I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're still grieving Thomas. But these past weeks with you and Penny, they've been the happiest of my life. Olivia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Forrest took her hands in his. They were small but strong, marked by the work she'd been doing around the ranch. I'm asking if you might, someday, consider being more than just my housekeeper. If you might consider being my wife. A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek. It hasn't been long, she echoed his words. Some would say too soon after Thomas. I'm not asking for now, Forrest clarified. I'm asking if the idea is something you might think about. For the future. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, and Forrest held his breath, afraid he had ruined everything with his forwardness. I've already thought about it, she finally said, her voice soft but sure. More than I probably should admit. Hope bloomed in Forrest's chest. And I think, Olivia said, moving closer still, that sometimes life gives you a second chance at happiness when you least expect it. Forrest's hands trembled as he reached up to cup her face. Is that a yes? To thinking about it, I mean, Olivia smiled through her tears. It's a yes to more than that, Forrest Wade. It's a yes to building a life here with you, when the time is right. Forrest's heart felt too big for his chest. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and then, as Olivia responded, deeper and more certain. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Forrest rested his forehead against hers, unwilling to move away just yet. We should go inside, Olivia whispered. It's getting cold. But they lingered a moment longer on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, watching as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead. In that moment, Forrest knew with absolute certainty that his random stop at an abandoned blacksmith shop had been the most fortunate detour of his life. He had gone looking for horseshoes and found a family instead. Winter descended on Wade Ranch with a fury that Forrest hadn't seen in years. Snow piled high around the house, and the temperatures dropped so low that the creek froze solid. But inside, warmth and happiness prevailed. Forrest expanded the small bedroom where Olivia and Penny slept, adding a window seat where Olivia could sit and sew while watching the snow fall outside. He built a proper crib for Penny, carving her name into the headboard along with a pattern of small stars. With the cattle sheltered in the barn and the outside work limited by weather, Forrest spent more time in the house than he ever had before. He and Olivia would sit by the fire in the evenings, talking about their hopes for the ranch, for Penny, for themselves. I was thinking, Forrest said one night in December as they sat side by side on the small sofa he had brought from town, that come spring we might build onto the house, add another bedroom or two. Olivia looked up from her mending. Planning for the future, are you? Forrest felt his face grow warm, and not from the fire. Well, yes, if you and I are going to. That is, if we decide to marry, we might want more space. For Penny to have her own room as she grows. And maybe for other children? Olivia finished for him, a smile playing at her lips. If you wanted that, Forrest said carefully. I wouldn't presume to. Olivia set aside her sewing and took his hand. I do want that, Forrest. A home filled with children. Yours and mine. The simple statement filled Forrest with such joy that he had to take a moment before he could speak. Then we'll build in the spring, he said, squeezing her hand. As many rooms as you want. Christmas came, the first one Forrest had celebrated properly in years. He rode into town through the snow to buy gifts: a doll for Penny, a silver hairbrush for Olivia that cost more than he'd ever spent on anything that wasn't for the ranch. Olivia, in turn, presented him with a new shirt she had sewn herself and a hand-knitted scarf that she wrapped around his neck with tender care. As winter began to loosen its grip on the land, Forrest found himself watching Olivia more and more, marveling at how completely she had transformed not just his house, but his entire existence. She moved through the rooms with a quiet confidence, singing to Penny as she worked, stopping occasionally to gaze out at the land with a proprietary pride that matched his own. One evening in early March, as the first signs of spring began to appear in patches of green amidst the melting snow, Forrest returned from the barn to find Olivia waiting for him at the table. Penny was already asleep, and Olivia had lit candles instead of the usual lamp. What's the occasion? Forrest asked, hanging his coat on the peg by the door. Sit down, Olivia said, patting the chair beside her. I have something to ask you. Intrigued, Forrest did as she requested. Olivia took both his hands in hers, her expression serious yet tender. Forrest Wade, she began. These past months have been the most unexpected blessing. When you found me in that stable, I was at the lowest point of my life. I had lost everything: my husband, my home, my sense of security. All I had left was Penny and my determination to give her a better life. Forrest nodded, uncertain where this was leading but deeply moved by her words. You offered us shelter when we needed it most, Olivia continued. But more than that, you offered us a home, a place to belong. You have been patient and kind, never pushing, always respecting the memory of Thomas while building something new with me. She took a deep breath. What I'm trying to say is that I don't want to wait anymore. Life is too short and too precious to waste a single day of happiness. So I'm asking you, Forrest Wade, if you would do me the honor of becoming my husband. Not someday, not when more time has passed, but now. This spring. Forrest stared at her in wonder. You're proposing to me? A blush colored Olivia's cheeks. I suppose I am. Is that terribly forward of me? Forrest laughed, a sound of pure joy. It's perfect. You're perfect. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing each one in turn. And yes, Olivia James, I would be proud to be your husband this spring or tomorrow or whenever you'll have me. Tears shimmered in Olivia's eyes. I love you, Forrest. I didn't expect to find love again so soon, but there it is. I love you with all my heart. And I love you, Forrest replied, the words coming easily now that they had been spoken aloud. You and Penny both. More than I ever thought possible. They were married in April, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows around the ranch. The ceremony was small, just the preacher from Silver Creek, a few neighbors, and Penny, who watched with wide-eyed fascination from the arms of a neighbor's wife. Olivia wore a simple dress of pale blue that she had sewn herself, with white flowers in her hair. Forrest thought she had never looked more beautiful than when she walked toward him across the grass. Her eyes fixed on his, her future tied to his by choice and by love. I, Forrest, take you, Olivia, to be my wife, he said, his voice strong and clear despite the emotion choking him. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. When Olivia repeated the vows, her voice never wavered, though tears streamed down her face. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from their small gathering of friends seemed to Forrest like the most perfect sound in the world. That night, after the guests had gone and Penny was asleep in her crib, Forrest and Olivia stood on the porch of their home, much as they had on the night he had first declared his feelings. "Happy, Mrs. Wade?" Forrest asked, his arm around her waist. Olivia leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever imagined possible again," she said. "And grateful." "For what?" "For horseshoes," Olivia said with a soft laugh. "If thunder hadn't lost a shoe, you might never have stopped at that blacksmith shop." Forrest smiled, pulling her closer. "I think I would have found you somehow. Some things are just meant to be." The years that followed were good ones for the Wades. The ranch prospered under their combined care. Forrest expanded the herd, added sheep, and built the additional rooms onto the house as promised. Olivia planted a garden that yielded vegetables for their table and flowers for their souls. Penny grew from a baby to a toddler to a lively young girl with her mother's auburn hair and a spirit as free as the wind that swept across the Colorado plains. She followed Forrest everywhere, learning about the ranch, the animals, the land that would one day be hers. In the spring of 1877, Olivia gave birth to a son they named Frederick Thomas Wade, honoring both Forrest's father and Olivia's first husband. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Priscilla Grace, called Prissy by her adoring big sister Penny. Life wasn't always easy. There were harsh winters that threatened the livestock, dry summers that worried the crops, illnesses that kept them up at night with sick children. But through it all, Forrest and Olivia faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each passing year. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Forrest took Olivia riding to a spot on the ranch they both loved, a high meadow overlooking the valley, where wildflowers grew in profusion and the view stretched all the way to the distant mountains. "I have something for you," he said as they sat on a blanket, watching the clouds drift overhead. Olivia smiled. "You didn't have to get me anything. Having you and the children is gift enough." "Nevertheless," Forrest said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet pouch and handed it to her. Olivia opened it curiously, tipping the contents into her palm. A delicate gold locket gleamed in the sunlight. "Open it," Forrest urged. Inside, Olivia found a tiny painting on one side, a perfect miniature of the stable where they had first met. On the other side was an inscription, "For the woman who made a house a home. All my love always." "Oh, Forrest," Olivia whispered, tears filling her eyes. "It's beautiful. I had it made in Denver," Forrest explained. "Thought you should have something to remind you of where our story began." Olivia clutched the locket to her heart. "As if I could ever forget. That stable was the lowest point of my life and the beginning of my greatest happiness." Forrest helped her fasten the locket around her neck, his fingers lingering on the soft skin at the nape of her neck. "Do you ever regret it? Saying yes to a stranger who found you sleeping in a stable?" Olivia turned to face him fully, her eyes serious. "Not for a single moment. You saved us, Forrest, not just by giving us shelter, but by giving us a place to belong, by loving us." "You saved me too," Forrest said, pulling her close. "I was just existing before you came. Now I'm living." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about their children, their dreams for the future, the life they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. As they rode back to the house where Penny, Frederick, and Prissy waited with their neighbor who had watched them for the day, Forrest thought about how completely his life had changed in 5 short years. He had gone looking for horseshoes and found a family. He had opened his home to a widow and her baby and found his heart's desire. He had taken a chance on love and been rewarded beyond measure. The house came into view, smoke curling from the chimney, light glowing in the windows. Home. Not just the building, but the people inside it. His people. His family. Beside him, Olivia urged her horse forward, eager to see their children. Forrest watched her go, his heart full to bursting with love for this woman who had brought so much joy into his life. Some men searched their whole lives for the kind of happiness he had found in an abandoned stable on a stormy night. Some men never found it at all. Forrest Wade counted himself among the fortunate few who had not only found it but recognized it for the precious gift it was and held on tight, never to let go. 10 years later, 1885, the sound of laughter drifted through the open windows of the Wade Ranch house, mingling with the scent of apple pie cooling on the sill. Forrest paused in his work, straightening his back and wiping sweat from his brow, as he listened to the happy noise of his family. The ranch had grown considerably over the past decade. What had once been a modest operation with a small herd and a simple log house was now one of the most prosperous spreads in the county. The house had been expanded several times to accommodate their growing family and now boasted a proper dining room, a study for Forrest, and a sewing room for Olivia, in addition to bedrooms for each of the children. And there were more children now. After Penny, Frederick, and Prissy had come twins Paul and Pearl, born in the winter of 1881 during a blizzard so fierce that Forrest had been forced to deliver them himself when the doctor couldn't make it through the snow. The youngest, Patrick, had arrived just last year, a surprise blessing when Olivia had thought her childbearing years were behind her. Forrest set aside his tools and walked toward the house, drawn by the sounds of his family as surely as a moth to flame. Through the window, he could see Olivia at the table, helping Prissy with her letters while Pearl sat on her lap, playing with a rag doll. Frederick and Paul were on the floor, engaged in some elaborate game involving toy soldiers that Forrest had carved for them. Patrick slept in his cradle nearby, his tiny face peaceful in repose. Only Penny was missing from the tableau, and Forrest knew exactly where to find her. At 15, she had become his shadow on the ranch, more interested in cattle and horses than in the domestic arts that Olivia had tried to teach her. Sure enough, as Forrest rounded the corner of the barn, he spotted Penny in the corral, working patiently with a young colt they had acquired at the spring auction. Her auburn hair, so like her mother's, was braided down her back, and she moved with a confidence that made Forrest's heart swell with pride. "Easy now," she was saying to the colt, her voice gentle but firm. "That's it. You're doing fine." Forrest leaned against the fence, content to watch. Penny had a way with animals that reminded him of himself at that age, intuitive, calm, respectful of their nature. She sensed his presence and looked up with a grin that transformed her serious face. "Papa, come see how well Thunder's Pride is doing with the halter. He hardly fusses at all now." Forrest climbed over the fence and joined his daughter in the corral. The colt, a handsome bay with a white blaze down his face, was indeed standing quietly while Penny adjusted his halter. "You've done good work with him," Forrest acknowledged, patting the colt's neck. "He'll make a fine saddle horse when he's grown." "Can he be mine?" Penny asked, her green eyes Olivia's eyes looking up at him hopefully. "When he's trained, I mean. I promise to take full responsibility for him." Forrest pretended to consider the request, though in truth, he had already decided the colt would be Penny's from the moment they had purchased him. "Well, you have shown you know how to handle the responsibility," he said slowly. "And you'll be needing your own mount now that you're helping more with the herd." Penny's face lit up. "Really? He can be mine?" Forrest nodded, and Penny threw her arms around him in a rare display of physical affection. At 15, she had become more reserved with her embraces, trying so hard to be grown up. "Thank you, Papa," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. Forrest hugged her back, savoring the moment. You've earned it, Penny girl. They walked back to the house together, Penny chattering excitedly about her plans for training the colt. As they approached, the front door opened, and Olivia stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Even after all these years, the sight of her still made Forrest's heart skip a beat. Time had been kind to Olivia Wade. At 35, she was more beautiful to Forrest than she had been as the young widow he had found in the stable. The years had added character to her face, confidence to her bearing, and a depth to her eyes that spoke of a life fully lived. "There you two are," she called. "Supper's nearly ready, and you both need washing up." Penny raced ahead, eager to tell her siblings about her new horse. Forrest followed more slowly, drinking in the sight of his wife silhouetted in the doorway of the home they had built together. "You're staring, Mr. Wade," Olivia said with a smile as he reached the porch. "Admiring the view, Mrs. Wade," Forrest replied, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Most beautiful sight in Colorado territory." "Colorado State now," Olivia corrected him with a laugh. "For 9 years already." "And you're getting soft in your old age, Forrest Wade, with all these compliments." "Not old yet," Forrest protested. "Just appreciative." Olivia's expression softened. "Well, I appreciate you too. Now come inside before the children eat everything in sight. Frederick is growing so fast I can hardly keep him fed." The evening meal was a lively affair, as it always was in the Wade household. The children talked over one another, eager to share the events of their day. Frederick, at 8, was proud of having helped the ranch hand fix a broken wheel on the wagon. Prissy, 6, had learned to form her letters properly and insisted on demonstrating for everyone. The twins, 4-year-old Paul and Pearl, were more interested in playing with their food than eating it, while baby Patrick observed it all from his high chair with wide, curious eyes. Through it all, Forrest and Olivia exchanged glances across the table, silent communications born of years together. A raised eyebrow from Olivia when Paul tried to feed beans to the dog under the table. A small smile from Forrest when Prissy carefully copied her name onto a piece of paper for him. The shared look of pride when Penny announced her plans to help with the spring cattle drive for the first time. After the meal, when the younger children had been tucked into bed and Penny had retreated to her room with a book about horse training, Forrest and Olivia sat together on the porch swing he had built for their 5th anniversary. The night was warm for early spring, the sky clear and filled with stars. "I had a letter from my cousin in Denver today," Olivia said, her head resting against Forrest's shoulder. "How is Eleanor?" Forrest asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "Well enough. Her husband's business is thriving." Olivia paused. "She asked again if we might visit this summer. Says she's never even met the twins or Patrick." Forrest considered this. They rarely left the ranch, especially not all together. "It might be good for the children to see a bit more of the world than just Silver Creek," he admitted. "And we could combine it with business. I've been thinking of expanding the herd, maybe bringing in some new bloodlines." "So that's a yes?" Olivia asked, looking up at him with surprise. "It's a maybe," Forrest hedged. "We'd need to find someone reliable to watch the place while we're gone." "The Johnsons' oldest boy is looking for work," Olivia suggested. "And he's good with livestock. With him and our regular hands, the ranch would be in good hands for a week or 2. Forrest smiled at her eagerness. "You've given this some thought." "I have," Olivia admitted. "I love our life here, Forrest. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But sometimes I think it would be good for the children to see that there's a bigger world out there. Especially Penny. She's becoming a young woman now." The thought of his firstborn daughter growing up so quickly gave Forrest a pang. "She is at that," he agreed. "Though she'd rather be a cowhand than a lady, if you ask me." "She can be both," Olivia said firmly. Just as I'm both a rancher's wife and a woman who sometimes misses the theaters and shops of a proper city. Forrest looked down at her in surprise. Do you regret it? Staying here instead of going to Denver all those years ago? Olivia's answer was immediate and certain. Not for a single moment. This is where I belong. Where we all belong. She gestured toward the house where their children slept. But that doesn't mean we can't visit civilization occasionally. Forrest laughed, pulling her closer. All right, Mrs. Wade. You've convinced me. We'll go to Denver this summer. Show those city folk what a proper ranch family looks like. Olivia's pleased smile was reward enough for his concession. Thank you. It will be an adventure for all of us. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods by the creek. 15 years, Forrest said suddenly. Olivia looked at him questioningly. It's been 15 years since I found you in that stable, Forrest explained. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like you've always been here. Like there was never a time when this house wasn't filled with you and the children. Olivia's eyes softened. The best 15 years of my life, she said. Though they haven't all been easy. Forrest thought of the hardships they had weathered together, the drought of '79 that had nearly ruined them, the winter when Prissy had been so ill they feared they might lose her, the fire that had destroyed the original barn and nearly spread to the house. No, not always easy, he agreed, but always worth it. Olivia reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that time and sun had etched around his eyes. Do you remember what you said to me that first morning in the stable? When I asked why you would help a stranger, Forrest smiled at the memory. I said it was the right thing to do. The right thing, Olivia echoed. Such a simple phrase for something that changed our lives so completely. I didn't know then that doing the right thing would bring me so much happiness, Forrest admitted. I just knew I couldn't leave you and Penny there alone. My hero, Olivia teased gently, though her eyes were serious. No, Forrest contradicted her. You were the brave one, trusting a stranger enough to come to his ranch, building a new life after losing everything. Loving again when it would have been easier to close your heart. Loving you has always been the easiest thing I've ever done, Olivia said simply. From that first night when you kept watch while Penny and I slept, I knew you were a man worth loving. Forrest's throat tightened with emotion. Even after all these years, Olivia's words could still move him deeply. I thank God every day that Thunder lost that shoe, he said, his voice rough. Best piece of bad luck I ever had. Olivia laughed softly. I used to think it was chance that brought you to that stable on that particular night. Now I'm not so sure. Some things seem too perfect to be merely coincidence. Like finding everything you never knew you wanted in an abandoned blacksmith shop, Forrest suggested. Exactly like that, Olivia agreed. They sat together until the night grew cool, wrapped in each other's arms and in the contentment of a life well lived. When they finally went inside, they checked on each sleeping child. Penny, sprawled across her bed with a book still open beside her. Frederick, neat even in sleep with his hands folded on his chest. Prissy, surrounded by the dolls she insisted on having in her bed. The twins, who had somehow migrated to the same bed despite being put down in separate ones. And baby Patrick, his tiny chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of infant sleep. In their own room, as they prepared for bed, Forrest watched Olivia brush out her hair still auburn, though threads of silver had begun to appear. The simple domestic ritual was one he had witnessed thousands of times over the years, yet it still filled him with a sense of wonder that this remarkable woman had chosen to share her life with him. What are you thinking? Olivia asked, catching his reflection in her mirror. That I'm the luckiest man in Colorado, Forrest replied honestly. Maybe in the whole country. Olivia set down her brush and came to him, her arms sliding around his waist. "And I'm the luckiest woman," she said. "To have found a man who sees a widow and her baby sleeping in a stable and thinks not of the burden they might be, but of how he might help them." "I got the better end of that bargain," Forrest insisted, drawing her close. As they settled into bed together, as they had done for a decade now, Forrest reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had led them here. From a chance encounter in a storm to this life overflowing with love and purpose. He had gone looking for horseshoes and found everything he had never dared to dream might be his: a loving wife, a house full of children, a legacy to pass on, a heart full to bursting with contentment. Some men searched their whole lives for such treasures. Forrest Wade had found his in the most unlikely of places, proving once again that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as simple twists of fate, like a loose horseshoe on a stormy night. Epilogue. 20 years later, 1895, the Wade Ranch sprawled across the valley, bathed in the golden light of a late summer afternoon. What had once been a modest homestead was now one of the most respected cattle operations in the state. Its boundaries expanded threefold from Forrest's original claim. At 62, Forrest Wade still cut an impressive figure as he sat on his horse overlooking the property, though his hair was more silver than brown now, and the years of hard work had left their mark on his tall frame. Beside him, equally straight-backed in her saddle, rode Olivia, her auburn hair now streaked liberally with gray, but her green eyes as bright and perceptive as ever. "It never gets old, does it?" Olivia remarked, following her husband's gaze across their land. "This view." "Never," Forrest agreed, "though it's changed some over the years." Indeed it had. The original log house was still there, though it had been expanded and improved upon so many times that it now resembled a proper manor house, with a wide wraparound porch and multiple chimneys rising from its roof. New barns and outbuildings dotted the property, and the herd of cattle grazing in the distance numbered in the hundreds rather than dozens. But the most significant changes weren't visible in the landscape. They were in the lives that had been shaped on this land, the family that had grown and flourished here. Penny, now 30, ran her own horse breeding operation on the eastern section of the ranch. She had never married, preferring the company of her horses and the freedom of the bachelor's life, though she remained deeply connected to her family. Her reputation as one of the finest horse trainers in the state brought buyers from as far away as California and Texas. Frederick, at 23, had recently returned from 4 years at the university in Denver with a degree in agricultural science and a young wife named Sarah. They lived in a house Forrest and Frederick had built together on the northern edge of the property, and Frederick had taken over much of the day-to-day management of the cattle operation. Prissy, 21, and as pretty as her mother had been at that age, taught at the school in Silver Creek. She rode home each weekend, bringing news and books and a breath of town life to the ranch. There was talk of a young banker who had been calling on her, though Prissy insisted they were just friends. The twins, Paul and Pearl, were 19 and as different as two siblings could be despite their identical start in life. Paul worked alongside his father and brother on the ranch, while Pearl had shown a remarkable talent for medicine and was apprenticed to the doctor in Silver Creek, with plans to attend medical school in Denver the following year. Young Patrick, no longer so young at 14, was still at home, dividing his time between schoolwork and learning the ranch business. Of all the children, he most resembled Forrest in both appearance and temperament: quiet, thoughtful, with a deep connection to the land. "We should head back," Olivia said, interrupting Forrest's thoughts. "Everyone will be arriving soon." Forrest nodded. Today was a special day, their 25th wedding anniversary, and the entire family would be gathering to celebrate, along with friends from miles around. As they rode back toward the house, Forrest marveled at how quickly the years had passed. It seemed like only yesterday that he had found Olivia and baby Penny sleeping in that abandoned stable. Now that baby was a grown woman, and the life they had built together was rich beyond anything he could have imagined. The yard was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Frederick and his wife were setting up tables under the cottonwood trees. Prissy was hanging lanterns that would illuminate the gathering once night fell. Pearl and Patrick were arranging chairs, while Paul carried trays of food from the outdoor cooking pit where their longtime ranch hand, Miguel, was roasting a whole steer for the celebration. And there, supervising it all with her characteristic efficiency, was Penny. She spotted them first, raising a hand in greeting. "Mama, Papa, where have you two been? There's still so much to do." Forrest and Olivia exchanged amused glances as they dismounted. Some things never changed, including Penny's tendency to take charge. "Just taking a ride to our thinking spot," Forrest explained, handing the reins of both horses to a young ranch hand. "Your mother and I were feeling nostalgic today." Penny's expression softened. "Well, I suppose you've earned a bit of wool gathering on your anniversary. But we need Mama's input on the seating arrangements, and Aunt Eleanor has arrived from Denver with about twice as many packages as I think is reasonable." Olivia laughed, embracing her eldest daughter. "Your Aunt Eleanor has always believed in excess when it comes to gifts. I'll see to her right away." As Olivia moved off toward the house, Penny turned to Forrest. "Are you ready for your surprise, Papa?" Forrest raised an eyebrow. "I thought this gathering was the surprise." Penny shook her head, a mischievous glint in her eye. "This was Mama's idea. Mine is something else entirely. But you'll have to wait until everyone's here." Before Forrest could press her for details, Frederick called him over to help with a stubborn table leg, and soon he was caught up in the preparations for the celebration. By sunset, the yard had been transformed. Lanterns hung from trees and fence posts, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Tables laden with food and drink stretched in a long line beneath the cottonwoods. A small platform had been erected at one end of the yard, where a trio of musicians from town tuned their instruments. Guests began to arrive, neighbors from nearby ranches, townspeople from Silver Creek, old friends from as far away as Denver. Each brought congratulations and gifts for the couple who had become pillars of the community over the past quarter century. Forrest moved through the crowd, accepting good wishes and sharing memories, but his eyes kept returning to Olivia. She wore a new dress for the occasion, deep blue with lace at the collar and cuffs, and the gold locket he had given her on their 5th anniversary still hung around her neck. To Forrest, she was as beautiful now as she had been on their wedding day. When the food had been eaten and the formal toasts made, Penny stepped onto the small platform and raised her hands for silence. "Friends and family," she began, her clear voice carrying across the yard. "We're here tonight to celebrate 25 years of marriage between my mother and father, but we're also here to celebrate something more, a legacy of love that began in the most unlikely of places." She gestured to Forrest and Olivia, who stood arm in arm near the front of the crowd. "Most of you know the story, how my father was just looking for horseshoes on a stormy night and instead found my mother and me sleeping in an abandoned stable. How he offered shelter and then a home. How they built this ranch and this family together." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. The story of Forrest and Olivia Wade had become something of a legend in the area over the years. "What you might not know," Penny continued, "is that the stable where they met still stands. It's weathered and worn, but it's there on the edge of what used to be Redemption Creek, though the town itself is all but gone now." Forrest felt Olivia's hand tighten on his arm. They had never returned to the place where their story began, though they had passed near it on trips to Denver over the years. "My surprise," Penny said, looking directly at her parents, "is this." She nodded to Paul and Frederick, who stepped forward carrying something large and flat, covered with a cloth. They set it on an easel that had been placed on the platform, then pulled away the covering to reveal a painting. Forrest's breath caught in his throat. There on the canvas was the old blacksmith shop and stable, rendered in perfect detail the weathered siding, the small forge chimney, the wide doors where he had first led thunder on that fateful night. But the artist had painted it not as it must look now, abandoned and decaying, but as it had been then, sturdy and serviceable, with a soft light glowing from within and the silhouettes of a man, a woman, and a baby visible through the window. I commissioned this from an artist in Denver, Penny explained, using my own memories of the stories you've told over the years. It's for you both a reminder of where our family began. Olivia was openly weeping now, and Forrest felt his own eyes grow damp. He stepped forward, drawing Penny into a fierce embrace. It's perfect, he whispered against her hair. Thank you. After Penny's presentation, the musicians began to play, and the celebration shifted from formal to festive. Couples took to the impromptu dance floor in the center of the yard, and the younger children played games in the flickering lantern light. Forrest led Olivia in a dance, holding her close as they moved to the music. Happy anniversary, Mrs. Wade, he murmured. Happy anniversary, Mr. Wade, she replied, her eyes shining with love and memories. 25 years. Can you believe it? Best 25 years any man could ask for, Forrest said sincerely. Though I'd have been happy with 50 more. There's still time, Olivia teased. We're not so very old yet. Forrest laughed, spinning her in a circle that made her skirts flare out. No, not old at all. Just well-seasoned. As the night deepened and the celebration continued around them, Forrest and Olivia slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand to the small rise behind the house where they had often gone to watch sunsets over the years. The full moon illuminated the landscape, casting the ranch in silver light. From this vantage point, they could see the glow of lanterns in the yard, hear the music and laughter of their family and friends celebrating below. Did you ever imagine this? Olivia asked, gesturing toward the scene. That night in the stable, did you ever think we would have all this? Forrest considered the question seriously. No, he admitted. I hoped for a home, for someone to share it with. But this, he waved his hand to encompass not just the physical ranch but all they had built together. This is beyond anything I could have dreamed. Olivia leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly into the hollow of his shoulder as it always had. I was so afraid that night, she confessed. Afraid for Penny, for myself. Afraid of what the future held for a widow with no money and a baby to care for. You were the bravest person I'd ever met, Forrest said. Still are. Not brave, Olivia contradicted him. Just desperate. But you changed that. You gave us hope. You gave me purpose, Forrest countered. A reason to make this land more than just a place to raise cattle. A reason to build a home instead of just a house. They stood in silence for a time, content in each other's company and in the knowledge of all they had accomplished together. You know, Olivia said eventually, I still have that letter from my cousin, the one inviting me to Denver. I keep it in my memory box. Forrest looked down at her in surprise. After all these years? Why? To remind myself how close I came to a completely different life, Olivia explained. If I had gone to Denver, become a seamstress there, I might have made a living, might even have found some happiness eventually. But I would never have had this. She gestured toward the ranch, toward the celebration still in progress. I would never have had you. Thank God for loose horseshoes, Forrest said fervently. Olivia laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when she was young. Indeed, and for stubborn ranchers who insist on traveling in storms. They made their way back to the gathering, where their children and grandchildren greeted them with hugs and more congratulations. The painting Penny had commissioned had been moved to a place of honor inside the house, where it would remain as a permanent reminder of their beginnings. Later that night, When the guests had departed and the family had retired to their respective homes and rooms, Forrest and Olivia stood once more on the porch of the house they had shared for a quarter-century. 25 years, Forrest mused, echoing Olivia's earlier words. And yet, when I look at you, I still see that young woman from the stable, fierce in her protection of her child, uncertain but determined to make a way forward. And when I look at you, Olivia replied, I still see that tall cowboy with kind eyes who offered shelter when I needed it most, who looked at a widow and her baby sleeping in a stable and saw not a burden, but a possibility. Forrest drew her into his arms, holding her close as the moon sailed high above their home. The best possibility of my life, he said softly, and the greatest blessing I never knew to ask for. Together, they looked out over the land that had been the setting for their love story, a story that had begun with a simple search for horseshoes and had grown into a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It was a good story, Forrest thought, a story of chance and choice, of hardship overcome and joy embraced, a story still being written in the lives of their children and grandchildren. A story that had started in the humblest of circumstances but had grown into something extraordinary. A love story set against the backdrop of the Wild West, where a cowboy who was just looking for horseshoes had found instead the greatest treasure of all a family to call his own.